You are worth $38.4 million. And the man who cuts your hair thinks you work in insurance. Something with the word adjuster in it. Something he heard you say once 3 years ago and never bothered to update. You have had 4 haircuts since then. You have never corrected him. This is not an accident. This is architecture. It starts the way most of these things do. With a single rental property and a piece of advice you almost did not take. You were 27. You just closed on a duplex in a working-class part of town. $164,000, financed with almost nothing down because a small local bank still did that kind of lending back then. The man at the title company, an older man named Reyes who had closed thousands of these deals and cared about maybe 4 of them, looked up from the paperwork and said something that would change the entire shape of your life. He asked whether you wanted the property in your own name or in an LLC. You did not know what he meant. He explained. Your own name because that is what felt normal, what felt like ownership was supposed to feel like. He shrugged and said your call. But if a tenant slips on that back step in the winter and decides to sue somebody, they're going to sue you personally. Not a piece of paper. You closed on the LLC version instead. $89 to file with the state. You did not think about it again for 2 years. That is the whole beginning. Not a plan. Not a 5-year vision board. Just a sentence from a tired man at a title company that planted something you would not understand the size of for another decade. By 31, you owned 6 rental units spread across 3 separate LLCs because a lawyer you had hired for a lease dispute told you never to put more than 2 or 3 properties in the same entity. If someone sues one building, she said you do not want them able to touch the others. Her name was Denise. She billed $310 an hour and was worth every dollar, though you did not fully understand why until years later when a tenant in one of your buildings fell down an icy staircase and sued for $340,000. The lawsuit named the LLC that owned that single building. It never touched the other 5. It never touched your house. It never touched your name printed nowhere in the filing except as registered agent for service of process. A title that meant nothing to anyone who read it and everything to you. By 35, the rentals had become something larger. Not a business exactly. More like a small ecosystem of paper. 6 LLCs became 11. 11 became a holding company that owned pieces of all 11. So instead of managing 11 separate sets of taxes and bank accounts and headaches, you managed one entity that quietly managed the rest. Denise called this consolidating the tree. You called it Tuesday afternoons at a desk with a second monitor moving numbers between accounts that had never once had your actual name on a bank statement. Somewhere in there, you stopped opening accounts yourself. A business banker named Priya who had handled your accounts for 6 years could open a new account for an LLC without you ever walking in. A registered agent in Wyoming, $125 a year, received your legal mail. None of it arrived at your actual house. Wyoming does not require LLCs to list their owners in any public database. Neither does New Mexico. You picked Wyoming because it was cheaper and nobody made documentaries about it. By 39 you had a trust. Not the kind people imagine when they hear that word. No oak paneled room. No reading of a will. Just a document drafted by Denise's firm that owned the holding company that owned the 11 LLCs that owned the buildings that housed 41 tenants who paid rent to a property management company that had never once in 6 years needed you to answer a maintenance call personally. The trust had a name that meant nothing to anyone. A string of words picked specifically because it would not Google well. Would not connect to your last name. Would not surface if someone typed your name into a search bar at 2 in the morning trying to figure out what you were actually worth. That is what most people get wrong about this. They think anonymity is one big dramatic decision. One single act of hiding. It is not. It is 40 small boring decisions made over 12 years. Each one costing somewhere between $89 and $4,000. Each one adding a layer that by itself looks like nothing and together adds up to a structure that nobody has any real reason or real ability to see through. Denise looked up from her folder during your 3rd full accounting meeting and said you know on paper you do not really exist. She meant it the way an engineer might admire a bridge. Structurally, not emotionally. You took it as the nicest thing anyone had said to you in a professional setting in years. The total that year crossed $38 million for the first time. Real estate equity, the private bank accounts, a small stake in a friend's manufacturing company bought quietly through the holding company, and a municipal bond ladder that threw off $210,000 a year without you touching it. Denise was not particularly interested in the number. She wanted to know whether the operating agreements were current, whether the registered agent fees had been paid, whether the trust's annual filing had gone out on time. To her the structure was the actual asset. The money was just what the structure happened to be holding. There is a version of this story where you become someone different once the number gets large enough. You watched that happen to a man named Colton, someone you knew from business school, who made real money in a software exit at 34 and spent the next 3 years making absolutely sure everyone he had ever met found out about it. New watch, new truck with extra chrome that cost $30,000 more than the base model for reasons nobody has ever explained satisfactorily, a boat he used 4 times a year and mentioned in conversation approximately 400 times. You saw him at an alumni event 2 years after his exit. He was standing near the bar talking loudly about a real estate fund he was raising, wearing a jacket that had clearly been chosen to be noticed. 3 different people were half listening with the specific practice patience people use when they suspect someone is about to ask them for money. You were wearing a fleece you had bought at a sporting goods store for $34 on clearance. You drove there in a 2018 Subaru Outback with 88,000 miles on it, purchased used, paid in cash, registered to one of your LLCs for a business use tax deduction Denise had set up years earlier. Someone asked what you did. You said some real estate, mostly nothing exciting. Which was technically 100% true and also almost entirely beside the point. Nobody at that event asked you for money. Nobody's eyes did the quiet calculation people's eyes do when they think they have spotted a number worth chasing. You keep your personal accounts thin on purpose. The real money does not live where anyone, including yourself in a moment of weakness, could easily access it or accidentally reveal it. Your sister does not know the number. She knows you do fine. 8 months ago she called on a Sunday night and told you carefully in the voice people use when they have rehearsed something that she was $23,000 behind on medical bills and a car repair and a landlord who had raised her rent $200 a month with 30 days notice. You could have sent her $23,000 before the call ended. It would not have registered as a decision on your balance sheet. It was roughly 4 days of what the bond ladder alone generates. You did not send it that night. Instead you asked her to send you every bill. You spent the following Saturday at her kitchen table, her 2 kids doing homework in the next room, going through every line item the way Denise had once gone through your folder with you. You found a billing error worth $4,100 that the hospital corrected after 2 phone calls. You found a payment plan option nobody had told her existed. You helped her write an email to the landlord citing a local ordinance about notice periods that reduced the rent increase to something she could actually absorb. By the end of it, the real gap was closer to $8,000, not $23,000. And you covered that from a personal account framed as a loan you were not going to actually collect on, though you never said that part out loud. You did not tell her the number. You did not tell her about the trust, the 11 LLCs, the registered agent in Wyoming who has never once heard your voice. Some of that is protection. If she does not know, she cannot accidentally say something at a family dinner that reaches the wrong ears. But if you are honest with yourself, some of it is something closer to grief. There is a specific loneliness in sitting across a kitchen table from someone you love, watching them do math with numbers that are to you no longer really numbers at all, and knowing that the kindest thing you can do is pretend the gap between you is smaller than it actually is. The structure gets tested exactly once in a way that matters. A former business partner named Gray, who had co-signed on one deal a decade earlier and felt wrongly but sincerely that he was owed a piece of everything that came after, filed a lawsuit naming you personally. His lawyer spent 4 months trying to trace assets back to your name. He found the house modest, paid off, worth maybe $410,000. He found the Outback worth less than the tow truck that would need to move it. He found a personal checking account with, at the time, $7,800 in it. He did not find 11 LLCs. He had no legal basis to connect to you because the connecting document was a trust instrument filed in a state that does not require beneficial ownership disclosure, managed by a holding company whose only listed contact was a registered agent who has never in 9 years spoken to you on the phone. The suit settled for $22,000. You paid it from the personal account refilled from the holding company through a distribution planned as ordinary business income months before the lawsuit was ever filed. Nobody at Gray's law firm to this day has any idea that the man they sued for damages they believed were in the millions was at the time worth roughly 40 times what they were trying to extract from him. It did not feel like a win exactly. It felt like watching a smoke detector you had installed 9 years earlier for reasons you could not fully articulate at the time go off during an actual fire and do precisely what it was built to do. The 3-person team you eventually built runs the same way the LLCs do. Compartmentalized, load-bearing, none of them holding the full picture. Priya sees the accounts but not the trust. The part-time attorney sees the trust but not the day-to-day cash flow. The bookkeeper sees the cash flow but has never been told what any of it adds up to in total because no single person needs that number to do their job. And the fewer people who have it, the fewer people there are who could ever hand it to somebody else on purpose or by accident. You are structurally the only person alive who has ever seen the whole shape of it at once. The annual cost to run this structure is real. Denise's retainer is $18,000 a year. Registered agents across 3 states run another 600. The full family office arrangement comes to roughly $54,000 annually. Which sounds like a lot until you remember what 4 months of a well-funded plaintiff's attorney almost cost you and what it would have cost if he had found anything at all. You have come to think of the $54,000 less as an expense and more as an insurance premium against a version of your life you have no interest in living. The version where people know. And knowing changes how they treat you, what they ask you for, and how carefully you have to watch every room you walk into for the rest of your life. The number arrives the day you finally sit with it in an email from your accountant with the subject line Q1 Consolidated Summary. You are standing in a hardware store in the plumbing aisle holding a $6 compression fitting because one of the rental units has a slow leak under a kitchen sink. You almost do not open the email. The number at the top says 38.4 million. You read it once. Then a second time. The way you read something when part of you assumes you have misread a decimal point. A man near you in the aisle is comparing 2 brands of PVC primer, entirely unaware that 18 inches away stands someone whose combined holdings could purchase the entire store, the shopping center it sits in, and roughly 40 more like it. Nobody in the store knows. The cashier does not know. He asks if you found everything okay. You tell him you did. You drive home in the Outback, windows down, because the air conditioning has been making a noise for 2 weeks you keep meaning to have looked at. You thought years ago that a number like this would feel like an arrival. Instead, what you feel sitting in your driveway with the engine off is something closer to what you felt the day Denise first said you did not really exist on paper. A kind of relief that has nothing to do with money and everything to do with the fact that the structure held. That nobody found you. That the maze worked exactly the way it was built to. Your sister calls that same evening to tell you the landlord backed off the rent increase entirely after her follow-up letter. She is relieved, laughing a little, thanking you for the Saturday you spent at her kitchen table. She has no idea what happened in a hardware store 4 hours earlier. You tell her you are glad it worked out, and you mean it completely. 11 LLCs keep collecting rent from 41 tenants who will never know your name. A registered agent in Wyoming keeps receiving mail addressed to entities he has never once had to explain to anyone. And somewhere in a spreadsheet a number keeps compounding quietly without ceremony. Exactly the way it was built to. For a person who on paper has arranged to barely exist at all.